is just going to be me talking about my thoughts on indie games dev and in general how the kind of independent games community has changed over the last 10, 20 years or so, and how I feel that's kind of affected me as a game developer, me as a programmer or a software engineer, kind of working in that industry, in the games industry as a whole, and just kind of me talking about really my thoughts. So that's what this video is going to be about. It's going to be my opinion. Doesn't necessarily mean that this is how it is. This is just how it's kind of affected my life and how I think that I've even changed. Because the problem with talking about topics like this is that a lot of it happens to be kind of dependent on the person talking about it as a human being, as a person. We all change, we all grow, our interests change over time. For example, I can't just say that the games industry has disintegrated and disappeared and it's now a boring place to work in compared to 4 years ago, because that might actually just be me as a person having changed over 4 years and become someone who is no longer interested in making games. So all I'm saying is that these vlogs, these videos that I'm making, I don't want you to necessarily think that I'm stating facts just because I work in the industry, therefore I know everything. That's not true at all. It's just kind of me sharing my life with you guys and my opinion on certain things. And what I love to actually do is read your comments. I love to hear from you guys as to how you feel, because although I do kind of network with people in the industry quite a lot, because I work in the industry obviously, so I talk to people, but I just love hearing what people both outside the industry and in the industry, in the greater industry, kind of have to say as well. So leave a comment below in regards to anything I say. Don't necessarily feel like you have to start hating me because you disagree with me. Let's just talk about it and we can kind of just start a discussion, because that's what I kind of love to do with these videos. Anyway, I don't necessarily want to drag this video out into just talking about my whole opinion of the indie game dev community and how that's changed and how game development itself has changed over the last 10 to 20 years. I might make follow-up videos or videos in the future that might talk about that. I just wanted to say a few words, I guess, specifically on how I feel that things have changed and what I feel that kind of area of the industry is. And the first thing I really want to say is that I feel that game development has kind of split up into two distinct parts. It was always kind of two distinct parts, but I feel like as time goes on they become more and more separate. And that is kind of the AAA game dev community and then the indie game dev community. Or, I mean, AAA is such a term that I guess the corporate kind of commercial games versus the kind of independent games. Independent itself usually means free of kind of any publisher. Whoa, that sun. That's one of my sunglasses. Free from kind of any publisher, although as we know, a lot of games that we consider indie games do in fact have a publisher. So really indie game dev I think is just more of a genre now than anything else, and it's commonly associated with kind of teams of people that make games that aren't necessarily too large, right? It might just be like 2 or 3 people, or maybe a small team of 10 people who kind of funded themselves through either kind of crowdsourcing like Kickstarter or Patreon, or maybe they've just saved up money and they've kind of just gone indie. That wind. Hopefully you can hear me alright. Gone indie in the sense that they've left corporate jobs to found something by themselves. And that's kind of another, I guess, definition for independent games. But really I'm just talking about kind of teams of small people working on games versus kind of commercial or corporate games. My bike just fell over because of the wind. Great. Ooh, I hope my glasses didn't break. I'll be right back. No, luckily that they didn't, because I've broken these glasses before. Well, this is a different pair, same glasses, but anyway, the point is, that sun's coming out. The point is, when I talk about independent games, I'm talking about games that are made by independent teams, meaning like a small team of people who aren't funded by a massive organization, whereas commercial kind of AAA games, I guess, is just a larger group of people, usually corporate and commercial enough where they have investors and they have people to please, and therefore, as you probably all know, the common kind of association of evilness comes from, because their motives aren't 100% pure in the sense that they're not just aiming to make a good game for people to play. they're aiming to make money, and I think that's a really important distinction between kind of commercial or AAA games and indie games, where indie games might be, I mean, obviously everyone wants to make money, but they might be more leaning towards creating a good player experience because that is more important to them to make money in the long run, because they can capture people's attention, like kind of build an audience and then monetize that further out. Or kind of AAA companies who already have a large audience, and therefore I feel they don't necessarily have the player's best intentions in mind, because they're not trying to make a game that is going to be as good to play as it is just to make more money, because that's kind of what the commercial world is about and the business world is about. So two kind of distinct groups of people creating products that are seemingly the same but are yet different. And I just want to kind of, I guess this video is almost going to be opening a dialogue as to how I feel about that, and there'll be plenty of videos I think for, going on, because it's already been like probably over 5 minutes and I haven't actually said anything. I've just been kind of defining terms and stuff like that. That's kind of how I see the community. And what's interesting is that as the years go on, it seems to change in the sense that it seems to grow further and further apart. People tend to maybe start realizing that commercial studios are aiming to make money, which is, I don't know, like to me that's, I don't know how they didn't see that before. I mean, you know, the entertainment industry, the games industry, they make products which are the games, which they, or services, which they then sell to make money, and the whole point of that entire industry is to generate money. That's kind of the point of pretty much any business out there. So I'm not sure why that's kind of new to people, but I think maybe because players that were once young are maybe growing up and becoming a little bit more, I don't know, smarter, I guess, or something like that. I'm not really 100% sure. But either way, it kind of just tends to become more about the commercial money-making aspects than it is about creating art or creating kind of player experiences, which is what the indie kind of game dev crowd seems to think that they're more about. So that's kind of my thoughts, I guess, on the difference between the two groups of people that tend to, I guess, make games. AAA, commercial, and then the kind of indie game dev teams who are completely different. I think that a big reason why it's changed so much is because the scale of games in general has grown enormously. I mean, if you think of games in the 90s, they had rather small groups of people working on them, maybe like 10 people, and they'd create, you know, what we kind of consider AAA games, because they were made by kind of huge companies, or companies that are huge now. And that was kind of as much effort, I guess, as people were willing to dedicate to creating video games. But if you look at games now, I mean, they have the same, like the biggest games out there have similar budgets to movies. Like we're talking, you know, over $100 million to make one product, to make one game. Whereas, you know, if you look at the 90s or early 2000s, like it wasn't like that at all. Games were kind of a lot smaller in scale. People weren't trying to create such massive games. And I think that because I guess businessmen or women, business people, have kind of decided that games are actually a decent investment, they kind of see games as almost a way to, I can pour more money into a game and get more money out of it. And they kind of end up scaling up their investments, and you get large studios and you get massive kind of $100 million games. And obviously, independent game teams can't compete with that kind of money, that kind of power. So they end up making completely different products. And that separation starts to kind of exist and grow, I think. So that's definitely interesting. That's not to say that independent game development is all about the product and not about money. I mean, if you think about how many people have tried to recreate something like Minecraft to make money, like people do that. You can't generalize AAA game dev as being like evil and indie game dev as being amazing, because it's completely different. And there are so many independent game teams that just stop existing after a while, just completely fall apart because their games don't sell well, and obviously they need money to keep running because they need to pay salaries to people, they need to rent an office space, all of that kind of stuff. there's costs associated with game programming and creating games basically. So of course there's gonna have to be some kind of revenue flowing in order to pay for those expenses. And making games does tend to be fairly expensive, which is why I guess a lot of game dev jobs are associated with low salaries and kind of not making much money, because games tend to be more effort than they're worth usually. Of course, some games like Minecraft explode exponentially, but for the most part, games aren't really seen as a very smart investment. They're a risky investment, even now in 2018, where games are doing fairly well and we are becoming quite a large chunk of the entertainment industry. It's still not something that I think, would be a very wise investment. For example, if you were to say to a group of people, hey, leave your jobs, let's make a indie game dev studio, we'll make a lot of money, that's risky. I mean, yes, you might, but you're probably not going to. It's still a risky kind of investment for indie game dev people. So of course, money is still a big issue for that. I just think in general, commercial kind of companies, money, they just potentially tend to be better at making money than indie game dev people, and better at conveying that, perhaps, like better at extracting money from players, and because of that they're seen as being more evil, whereas I don't think that's necessarily true, because I think that anyone who makes a game would like to make money. I mean, money, if anything, guarantees that you can keep making games in the future. So of course, at the end of the day, everyone's goal kind of is to make money, unless you're just making a free game as like just either for education, for teaching yourself how to make games, or for learning how to make games, or you're actually trying to kind of learn how to make games, or just make something fun in your spare time. Like, of course, not everything has to be about money, but in general, I think the industries are, of course, trying to make money. So that's kind of the money issue, I think, aside. I also think that while people tend to divide those two industries, they really shouldn't. I mean, the only difference is the amount of people working on the game. Like, if you look at large studios, apart from just the number of people working on the game, I think the history of the studio, meaning all the technology the studio has built up, is also quite a large asset that smaller companies just don't have. If you were to create a completely new company from scratch with maybe about 5 to 10 people right now, and your goal was to make games, as an example, you wouldn't have really any base technology to start with, which is why you'd probably turn towards a game engine such as Unity or Unreal, because you wouldn't be able to, like, you could create your own game engine, of course, but that would just be such an expense, that'd take you so much time and so much effort, that it's easier to start with an existing product like Unity or Unreal and just build your game on that. Versus a kind of commercial studio who has been around for 10 years, they already have built their base technology, and they would obviously be more inclined to use that. So apart from differences in people, there's also the differences in kind of technology and the assets and the power, I guess, and the reach that those well-established companies do have. But at the end of the day, really, you're both just making a game. You're both just making an interactive experience for a player. So maybe it's not so smart to start kind of completely separating them. Yes, they are different, but I think that we've kind of blown them out to be a lot more different than they kind of are. So, yeah. And even to the point where people start talking about, how do I get a job in the games industry? Oh, well, do you want to work in a AAA studio, or do you want to work in an indie game dev studio? That's how different I think it's become, where the skill set required to work on independent games is so different than the skill set required to work on commercial games, that to me they kind of feel like two different industries. So yeah, anyway, that's how I feel about kind of the state of indie games. I want to talk about some other stuff, such as what it's kind of like to get a job in the commercial games industry versus indie game industry, what I think are some good tips for transitioning between the two industries, as well as how I think Unity and Unreal have really changed the indie game dev industry, and in fact the entire game dev industry, and in my opinion they've kind of made a lot of things worse as well. So yeah, thanks. They've kind of made a lot of things worse as well. So definitely ideas for future videos. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. I'll try and reply to some of your comments as well, and maybe even make videos out of them to talk about them. I'm still here in Germany. Definitely follow me on Instagram to keep up to date with what I'm doing. The Cherno is my name on Instagram. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.